Hello, my friends. Some words for Parshat Vayeshev and Shabbos Chanukah. During the first half of the 12th century, at the same time that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was finishing the Kuzari about an imaginary theological disputation in defense of Judaism, the Christian philosopher Peter Abelard was finishing his own imagined disputation between a philosopher and a Jew in an effort to criticize Judaism. One of the arguments Abelard lodged against the Jews' conception of what God expects of us is this: if we need to perform mitzvot in order to serve God properly and achieve righteousness, what will you say about all those generations of righteous people who lived before the Torah was given, such as Noach, Chanoch, Malkitzedek, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaacov, and so forth? These are people who reached great levels of righteousness without performing the mitzvot. Does this not prove that righteousness is attainable without observing mitzvot? Classical Christian argument. There are many ways to answer this basic question. Of course, it's possible to reach righteousness without performing 613 mitzvot. But Hashem made a special covenant with the Jewish people that requires them to go above and beyond that which is required to attain personal righteousness. These mitzvot not only positively affect ourselves behaviorally, but also impact the cosmos themselves on a metaphysical plane. Only the Jewish people and no one else are required to elevate the world through our mitzvah performance. But let's take a different approach. What if we accept Abelard's premise? What if we look at the history of the entire book of Genesis using his assumption? Perhaps the whole tragic story of Yoseph and his brothers is a lesson about what can happen to a group of people who don't yet possess the Torah. True, individuals can attain righteousness, but they will be far and few in between. But leave the general population, even brothers within the same family, to their own devices, without a divine set of rules, and they will eventually devolve and deteriorate, a la Lord of the Flies, into a violent group that will end up self-destructing. Perhaps this story of Yosef and his brothers is an illustration of why Hashem needed to give Bnei Yisrael a Torah as a way of preventing future fratricide. Hashem caused Yaakov's family to descend to Egypt to prepare them over the next few hundred years or so to eventually receive the Torah, the cure for the evil inclination within society, upon their liberation from Egypt. If this is an acceptable reading of our stories in Genesis, then we might better understand the cryptic statement made by many of the mystical commentators who seek to explain why Chanukah always falls out during these parshiot when we read about the story of Yosef and his brothers. The work Megale Amukot by the Kabbalist Rav Nosson Nata Shapiro writes that the Chanukah story is actually an atonement for the Yosef story. We know this from the fact that the words Yosef, the two words Melech Yavan, and the word Antiochus all have the same gematria, the same numerical value of 156. Now, at face value, this could all be just a coincidence, because there seems to be no connection between the Yosef story, which is a tragedy about brotherly betrayal, and the Chanukah story, which is about reclaiming Jewish tradition after an attempt to Hellenize the temple and the Jewish people. So what does this mean? Furthermore, we know from the Medrash that the two sins which linger with us for all of Jewish history are the sin of the golden calf, representing man's betrayal of God, and the sin of Yosef's brothers, representing man's betrayal of his fellow man. We read the story of the 10 martyrs, the Asara Harugei Malchut, on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, to remind us of the importance of treating our fellow man with love and respect, since according to tradition, the 10 martyrs were the surrogates for Yosef's brothers and bore their punishment for selling Yosef. If so, how can Chanukah, which is a story of victory for the Jewish people, correspond to the very same sin? So let's just clarify that there are two ways to rectify sin. One is through punishment, which is the story of the 10 martyrs. During an era of religious persecution, the Jewish people can atone for past sins through suffering. But there is another way to rectify sin, which is through reversing the sinful behavior and doing the opposite of what was done previously. If Yosef's brothers betrayed their brother, then a way to rectify the sin would be through defending and saving one's brothers. Did this happen during Chanukah? Well, in a fashion, yes. Recall that this holiday harkens back to a time when Jews themselves were divided between those who embraced our tradition and those who sought to assimilate to the Greek ways of philosophy and the Greek pantheon of gods, deities created in the image of man. The Maharal tells us that the difference between the first temple and the second temple, when the Chanukah story takes place, was that the first temple's function was to preserve the lofty Shekhinah, or divine presence, within the Jewish community. But the second temple's function was less ambitious, but no less vital. It served the purpose of preserving Jewish unity. By having a temple that represents the unified way of life and religious identity of the Jewish people, we could at least remain united as one people who worshipped one God with one uniform Torah. With the advent of Antiochus, who, with the assistance of a group of Hellenized Jews, defiled the temple by installing within it idolatrous statues and offering pigs as sacrifices, the very unity and integrity of the Jewish people was under attack. Had we lost control of the temple and its service, the Jewish people would have assimilated to the Greek ways, and our peoplehood would have been lost forever. In this sense, the Hasmonean effort to beat back the Greeks was a heroic act of not only saving the religion of Judaism, but also of saving the Jewish people. Where Yosef's brothers failed at retaining their sense of familial unity and commitment to stick together no matter how much they differed, Matisyahu and his sons fought valiantly to preserve our peoplehood. Because ultimately, without a common faith and religious practice that unites us, there is no hope for our lasting power as one family and one people. I believe this is encoded in the Chanukah story that we read about in our liturgy and our holy texts, especially when contrasted with the secular texts that deal with the actual history of this period. In our liturgy, we identify the enemy of the Chanukah story as the Seleucid Greeks, but in reality, a very large segment of Hellenized Jews were as much our enemy as the external Greeks. Consider that the origin of the Chanukah story starts with a man named Matisyahu, a Kohen from the town of Modi'in in Israel, who committed a great act of zealotry. You see, after the Seleucid persecutions began, Matisyahu was asked by a Seleucid Greek government representative under Emperor Antiochus IV Epiphanes to offer sacrifice to the Greek gods. He not only refused to do so, but slew with his own hand the Jew who had stepped forward to do so, together with the government official that required the act. Let's also recall that two very Hellenized and corrupt Jewish brothers, Jason and Menelaus, incited Antiochus to build a gymnasium in Jerusalem and defile the temple with idolatry. Why isn't the defeat of these enemy Jews mentioned anywhere in our Chanukah religious literature? In our Al Hanisim prayer, we state that the evil Greek Empire rose up against Amecha Yisrael, your nation of Israel, the one monolithic people who, despite the fact that some had succumbed to Hellenism, were still part of your chosen people. They may have strayed, but it's not their fault. They were adversely influenced by this evil foreign entity. In our recollection of the Chanukah story, there is no division between Jews. There's no Reform, conservative, modern, Haredi, Hasidish, Sephardi, etc. We are all just Amcha Yisrael. That's the way that we're described in the prayer. Divisions sadly continue within our people to this day. Jews who abandon religious tradition ultimately and tragically fall away from Judaism, and their children or children's children are lost forever to the vicissitudes of assimilation in the diaspora. Like the Hasmoneans before us, we struggle and fight to preserve Judaism and beat back the wave of assimilation and secularization. We do this not only for our own children, but for the children of every single Jewish family, because to lose one soul is to lose an entire world. It was because of the Hasmoneans' insistence to not give up on the Jewish people, no matter how distant or even oppositional some of those Hellenized Jews were to tradition, that they could achieve victory. It is in this sense that the Chanukah story is an atonement and a tikkun for Yosef's brothers' treachery. They gave up on their brother, and discarded him when he became too different from them, and through his dreams too much of a threat to them. He became the other, and they coldly severed their connection to him. The Hasmoneans refused to give up on our people, no matter how far they had strayed. They recognized that they had something that Joseph's brothers didn't yet have. They had a Torah that binds us together as a people and is worth fighting for so that we can maintain our unity. Surely there is a small number of Jews in the world today with whom we cannot possibly reconcile. They are like those few Hellenized Jews who actively assisted Antiochus in defiling the temple. But the vast majority of Jews in the world today are simply lost, without any sense of religious identity, and with just misguided ideologies. We can either write them off and identify them as the other, people who are a threat to our way of life and must therefore be avoided. Or we can take the position that, like the Hasmoneans, we must fight to retain our people's unity. Instead of distancing those Jews, we can stand up for tradition in the public sphere, make a Kiddush Hashem, and in the process unify the Jewish people around the Torah. Things look bleak now, but it's never too late for the Jewish people to change the world's perception of God and religion in general. If Chanukah rectifies the sin of Yosef's brothers, then the calling to rectify that sin is as loud today as in generations past. May our efforts at reuniting our brethren bring an end to our exile and bring us all to the redemption. May we see it b'meira b'yameinu. Amen. I wish you a beautiful Shabbos, a Shabbat Shalom, Chanukah Sameach. Enjoy the holiday, enjoy your family, and let's see you soon.